Hello and welcome, Year 8. It's Mr. Scott here from St. Cuthbert's, and we are going to be looking at some stuff today on how humans impact the environment, pollution, pesticides, stuff like that, as well as a little bit on the carbon cycle. Before we move on and we'll look at any of that, you should know that you will need a pen and some paper, because there are going to be some exam questions throughout that you can actually do, and obviously you might want to make some notes which would help you with the exam questions when you get to them. Okay, so if you can make sure you have a pen and paper, you could record the pause the PowerPoint here if you need to be able to go and get stuff and then come back. The first thing we're going to look at is a fast force, 4 questions that you will have seen previously in school and that you should technically already know the answers to, but are just to jog your memory on today's topic. So I'm not going to read all of the questions to you, I'm just going to let you have a read them yourselves. The only things I would fill in, when I say explain how a new predator in a food web affects the numbers of its prey, that's the things in the trophic level below it, on the next level down in the diagram. And in the last one, organic compounds is the things that we make in living organisms using carbon. Okay, how do they get from one animal to another? You can pause the video here just to make sure that you have time to answer all of the questions. Obviously answer them on a sheet of paper, and we're going to go through the answers when you are ready. Okay, you could then unpause the video and the answers will come up on the next slide. So, answers for the first 4 questions. Photosynthesis is the first one, which process can remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Respiration adds carbon dioxide to the atmosphere from animals. The numbers of prey, the things that they eat, will go down because the new predator would eat them. And how do we get organic compounds with carbon in them from one animal to another? Well, they're eaten. They feed on each other, don't they, to move it up. So, what are we actually going to be looking at today? We're going to look at how humans impact the environment. We're going to be having a look at the carbon cycle. We're going to go into pesticides and bioaccumulation, which is obviously something that humans use, which can affect other animals in an ecosystem, so the effects of humans on an environment, and how indicator species like lichens can actually be used to be able to see the effect that we're having. Okay? So human activities that impact the environment are things like habitat loss, hunting and poaching, transferring invasive species. I probably shouldn't read the whole list to you, I'll let you have a read for yourselves. And if I have a quick run through these with you, I can kind of explain to you why I've included them. Okay, in terms of habitat loss, human population is just getting bigger and bigger, and it requires additional space and resources. The land that we have and use has to be cleared to harvest products like timber and wood, and to make space for us to live in. Okay, the problem with that is going to be that obviously that was a whole environment where animals lived, and where plants lived and where insects lived, and all of those things are going to have to move. For example, huge areas of the orangutan's habitat have been cleared to make way for palm oil plantations. It's one of the reasons that people are quite against the use of palm oil in things like peanut butter and stuff like that, because all of the palm oil being used actually affects the orangutan. Hunting and poaching, it makes fair sense. I think most people will kind of go, well, I understand how that would affect the animals, but I'm just going to talk you through it. It's not so much that we can't hunt or fish animals, or fish, that we can't catch them and we can't use them. It's that if we are going to catch them and use them for food, then we do need to be aware of how much we are catching and how much we are fishing and how much we are destroying their population. Because when the population becomes really low, it becomes very difficult for them to then bring that population back up for them to be able to have enough babies to start overcoming the fact that we're overfishing, I guess. Some animals, it's to do with the effect that they have on us. For instance, the snow leopard. You'll have seen the adverts, the WWF adverts on TV for the snow leopard and the fact that the snow leopard's becoming extinct. There's two things that are affecting the snow leopard. One of them is climate change. One of them is that its environment is changing. But the other one is that as the snow leopards had to come down from the mountains to come and find food, it comes across farms and it eats the sheep and it kills the animals that are on the farms. So the farmers in that area are have not been traditionally educated to protect the snow leopard because they're predators, because they're dangerous, and actually will go out and shoot them and hunt them and kill them because they're damaging their livestock, they're damaging their farming, and therefore the amount of money that they actually achieve at the end of the day. And it's a big deal to them. Okay. If we're talking about invasive species, there's a good episode of The Simpsons where Bart at the end accidentally brings an American bullfrog to Australia, and the bullfrogs are reproducing everywhere, and as the Simpsons leave Australia, the whole country's covered in these frogs, and it's quite clever. There's another one when they were trying to get rid of something in Springfield, and they end up getting a load of it's a lizard, and it's Bart's flying lizard, and as they're trying to get rid of the flying lizard, they end up getting snakes that eat the lizards, and then somebody says to the mayor, well, what will happen when the snakes start to become a problem? And he said, we're going to get gorillas to eat the snakes. So it's a bizarre idea, but all of those would be invasive species, as in they don't normally live there, they're not usually there. Humans often accidentally introduce non-native species. Sometimes if it's an animal like a rat has got on board a boat or something like that. Traditionally that would have been how we took them to new islands, and if we think about the death of the dodo and how the dodo disappeared, a lot of that was to do with cats and rats and things being brought on boats, which then ate the dodo's eggs and kind of caused problems. Climate change is an issue across our entire planet at the moment. You might have seen that the Arctic Circle had a temperature of 38 degrees the other day. This is meant to be a frozen Arctic tundra. It's meant to be very, very cold, and yet the air temperature was 38 degrees C, which is a lovely hot day on a holiday resort, isn't it? So it's not ideal. And we do believe that we have a huge impact on that, and it actually happening. Droughts can also happen. Acidification of the oceans that can become more acidic, and the loss of sea ice as well, can all threaten the species that live there because their habitats are changing or disappearing. Sedentary species like plants obviously can't move away, so they need their habitat as it is where they've grown. They can't afford for it to change. Collection of animals in the pet trade. Many animals and plants get collected from the wild and sold through the pet trade, whether it's because people want them as pets or whether it's because people want to use them as food, or for other uses of animals. But yes, we do have a problem there. The Venus flytrap is a popular plant that people often collect from the wild. They dig them up and take them away when they probably should have left them where they were. And then pollution as well. So things like acid rain, heavy metals and pesticides will all damage the landscape. They'll damage the air quality, they'll damage the soil quality, and they'll cause some organisms to struggle to live where you are, where they were meant to live in the first place, which is causing issues. So all of those things, it might be worth you pausing the video, going away and making some notes on these 6 bullet points, or re-listening to this slide worth of information so that you can listen to what I've said again. But yes, we've covered all 6 of those so far. So there's just some pictures to go with those things that we've just talked through there. You can see an invasive species there, the kakapo. Obviously rhinos, black rhinoceros get hunted. You can see the deforestation going on in the top left-hand picture, which is obviously affecting the golden-crowned sipaka. Climate change for polar bears. If there's no ice, then they can't swim forever. They are good swimmers, but they're not adapted to live in water. They need something to be able to live on. And the pet trade there, somebody's collected a siamang ape monkey, and they're intending on keeping it in a cage or in a garden somewhere, probably for people to come around and see, because it's an interesting talking point, but it's not right for the animal. It's not the nice thing to do for the animal. So plastics is a huge problem in most of the developed world, because we use lots and lots and lots of plastic. Okay, and there's plastic in stuff that you wouldn't even imagine there would be plastic in. So there's lots of people are very angry at the moment about toothpastes, because there are one of the ways that they've found to make toothpaste very effective at cleaning your teeth is to add tiny little, what they call micro beads of plastic to the toothpaste. And as you scrub your teeth with those little plastic beads, obviously it takes off any plaque and stuff like that that is starting to build up on your teeth. When you spit those tiny little bits down the sink, obviously you can't see them and you're not aware of where they're going, but once they're into the water, they could be eaten by other organisms, or they could end up accumulating somewhere else and actually building up in a lake or at the seaside or whatever. And it's a lot of plastic. Around 275,000 tons of plastic are used every year in the UK. 15 million water bottles per day, if we think about it that way around. It's not generally biodegradable. One of the things lots of people are trying to think about doing is trying to produce plastics that are biodegradable, because if we can make things like water bottles out of something that will decompose in 50 years instead of 500 years, then it won't build up in our environment so much. Ideally, you'd get rid of single-use stuff altogether, I think would be the long-term goal. So this is known as the Great Pacific Garbage Patch, and it's basically an area where the currents kind of rotate round in circles, and it's huge. It's enormous. It covers an area around twice the size of France. It's called a gyre. Gyre, is that right? North Pacific gyre, and basically it's another word for island, effectively. And what we actually end up with is it's an island built of plastic. It is an island of plastic, and it's just being rotated and spun around by all of these currents. And there's lots of animals and plants and things that are attempting to colonize bits of it, but it's not very successful, because obviously it's not actual land. In this area, they suggest that plastic might outnumber plankton by 6 to 1. So if you think nothing eats plastic, but whales and other marine organisms might eat plankton, you're likely, for every mouthful of plankton that you take, to also have a mouthful of plastic, which is horrible. And it's not only affecting the species at sea, because obviously lots of it washes ashore, and then you can see a picture of a bird there that's obviously died when it got stuck in a plastic ring. Okay. Biodegradable means that, unlike plastic, a substance can be broken down or degraded by other organisms, bacteria, and decomposes. Cornstarch can be used to produce something that kind of looks like plastic but isn't. And you can add additives that would break the plastic down faster, but that's quite expensive, so most companies wouldn't use it, because they'd have to charge us extra for products. Yeah. So one of the things that we're looking at here, the green turtle, is hunted. The green turtle is being hunted by people, but it's also got a big problem with where it breeds. So the green turtle is currently considered an endangered species. It doesn't start to reproduce until 26 to 40 years of age, which is crazy if you think about it, because that gives people 26 years to catch it before it actually ever has a baby. And of course that means that it might never have a baby. It might never actually pass on its genes, and we might not get lots of babies in the next generation. They return to breed only once every 2 to 5 years, so they're not even likely to have a baby every single year. If they do make it to 26, they're likely to only have one, maybe one every 5 years. And the female has to haul onto the beach at night and digs a large nest and lays all of its eggs in the nest. But then they have an issue with things like crabs, other smaller organisms that will actually catch the babies as they're born overnight, as they come out of their shells and they start to head back to, as the babies start to head back to the sea. So this is its typical nesting habitat. This is what it typically looks like, is just a burrow in the sand. This one's busy using its big kind of arm wing thing to, this flipper, whatever you want to call it, I've lost the word for it now, there you go. It's using it to dig in the sand. Unfortunately, you can see in the picture in the bottom one, it's struggling to find somewhere to make its nest because it's all covered in plastic. It's covered in waste from us. If there's less places for it to nest, it's less likely to make any eggs. And if it can't make eggs, or if it can't find somewhere to lay them, then you know we're not going to have this animal for very much longer. So this I'm not suggesting you watch right this second. Okay, this is a 48-minute film, I believe. It's linked on the next slide. Obviously you guys can't get that through the video. You would have to search in Google Hawaii, a message in the waves. But it looks at the fact that Hawaii is kind of a micro version of the problems that all the rest of the world is having. Hawaii's got its own wildlife and it's got its own habitats, and on the waves lots of the food for those different animals and organisms that live there is being brought to Hawaii. It kind of floats in, and unfortunately what they're finding at Hawaii is that then that there's lots of plastic being brought, and the water quality isn't particularly good anymore in some cases, and it's causing problems for the animals that live there. Like I said, I'm not asking you to watch this now and stop doing what you're currently doing. We're going to work through the rest of the PowerPoint, but if you then want to go back and watch this later, there is a 48-minute documentary which is really very interesting about Hawaii and the things that are going on there in terms of conservation and stuff like that. So, the next thing that we need to consider is how we can actually measure the impact of conservation measures, right? And basically it's all about statistics, okay? We have to know almost everything about the species that we're looking at to be able to tell whether what we're trying to do is actually working. So, in the plastic waste example here, we've got an example of measurements we could make. Number of chicks successfully leaving the nest every season. Obviously, if say 50% of the chicks died before leaving the nest, then we can't count that 50% as having been impacted by plastics, unless they're dying in the nest because of plastics that are being brought. And you know, that's the kind of thing that we have to look at. How many die each season normally, like regularly, without plastic impact? Total population size trend, is it getting larger or smaller generally? If it's getting larger generally, is it still continuing to increase at the same pace, or is the increase slowing down because of the pollution from humans? And the quantity of plastic inside albatross. So the albatross, this was from the video that I'd suggested that you watch. They were looking at the fact that the albatross actually eats a significant amount of the plastic. You can see that dead bird picture above is an albatross that's died, and you can see what was inside the contents of its stomach. It's got little plastic toys in there, and it's got some plastic tubing, and there's lots of stuff that it's eaten that it probably shouldn't have eaten. And then the quantity of plastic on the beach as well. So if you were looking at a very clean beach, you couldn't then say, well, look, all of these albatross are dying because of plastic, because that beach is clean. You know, we have to compare a clean one to a dirty one, I guess. So, just a quick exam question for you. I would write these out onto your paper. Okay, list A gives 4 human activities, and list B gives the effect on the environment. This is an actual GCSE question, albeit a very simple one. There's no complication to it. You don't have to be able to understand what's written down. It is literally a case of which one do you think they match up to. So I'm going to give you a chance there to complete it. What I would do is just pause the video, complete the question, and then replay the video again, and we'll go through some answers once you've actually done the work. Okay? So this is our answers here. Digging a new quarry would reduce the land available for wild animals. Spraying pesticides on crops pollutes hedges around fields. Growing rice is actually bad for the environment because it adds methane to the atmosphere. And driving cars, releasing sulfur dioxide, produces acid rain. None of those things there would produce lots of litter, so we should know which one definitely the wrong answer was. It didn't match up to any of them, and then the others you just had to kind of work it out, I guess, from what you already know. So what we have on the next 3 slides is 3 examples of a carbon cycle, and the reason for that is that the carbon cycle diagram that you're given in your exam tends to be always different. I've seen about 8 different versions in the last 8 years worth of GCSE papers, so they don't always look the same, but they've always got the same things on them. If we work from the top up here, you can see that there is CO2 in the atmosphere. Any arrow that's going up to CO2 in the atmosphere is going up there because of the thing that's named. So if you look down at the little sheep, there's an animal going up to the atmosphere, and it says animal respiration. Respiration produces CO2 as part of the reaction. Plant respiration. Again, plants do respire, they don't just do photosynthesis, and they're also producing CO2 back into the atmosphere. And again, with the little factory on the end, emissions, burning fossil fuels, is giving out carbon dioxide from there. Okay? Anything that's moving away from that CO2 is actually saying that this process removes it from the atmosphere or stores it somewhere else. So the only one that's directly removed from the atmosphere is photosynthesis. You can see the one on the left hand side heading down to the tree. Photosynthesis, the plants take in CO2 to make glucose, okay, through photosynthesis using light. So that's the only one that directly takes it out. From there, the plant can be eaten. That's the organic carbon one. The plant can be eaten by an animal, or it can die and it can start to decay. That's the very bottom black one. And you can see that would then leave dead organisms and waste products, which can either become fossil fuels underneath, or they can start to be taken in by plants and then re-released to the atmosphere. So the next 2 slides are just 2 further examples of a carbon cycle. I'll show you them so you can see how different they can look. So while they all have different pictures and they all look different to each other, you will notice that they've all got the same arrows on them. Plant respiration, animal respiration, photosynthesis to the trees, fossil fuels being burned, fossil fuel combustion puts CO2 back in the atmosphere. You can follow it round in a circle, and it should just continue cycling round and round and round. Okay? So some of these places on your carbon cycle diagram are known as sources and sinks. Carbon sources provide inorganic carbon, so CO2, carbon that's not being used by an animal. So respiration in plants, we're actually releasing CO2 back into the atmosphere, and it's got carbon in it. Okay, and animals also do respiration. Burning fossil fuels will release CO2 as well. Whereas carbon sinks store carbon. So the carbon sinks on here are things like if I eat a sandwich, whatever carbon was in that sandwich, whatever it was that was in there, could be made into part of my body. And if it's made into my biomass, as we call it, if we turn it into some tissue within my body, then in that case, the carbon's stuck inside me until one day I actually burn it, until one day I use it. Or maybe, if I died and was eaten, then the animal that ate me would get it. Okay, so that's the idea. If I was in a food chain, that would be how it would work. And these can be stored as organic or sometimes inorganic compounds. So we're thinking about fossil fuels. They're not necessarily organic compounds. They're an inorganic compound which has managed to store some carbon as well. But carbon sinks, store carbon. That's better. Whew, that's hard. So, we've got an example of a question here. This is not one that I want you necessarily to do on your own. We're going to use this as like a model answer style thing, so I'm going to talk you through how I would answer it. Okay, I'm going to then let you have a go of it by yourselves, and we're going to mark it all together to make sure you know what it was you should and shouldn't have written about. As many scientists think that global air temperature is related to the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. The graph below shows changes in global air temperature and changes in the concentration of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So you can see changes in air temperature is up the left, going from 0.4 at the bottom all the way up to 1.4 at the top. That's the temperature since 1955. On the other side, carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere goes up from 270 at the bottom to 430 at the top. And you can see all the years running along the bottom. It starts at 1955 and it runs all the way up to 2015. Okay? So the question they ask you is to evaluate for and against, right? Argue both sides. Evaluate evidence for and against the theory that an increase in the concentration of carbon dioxide is causing the increase in air temperature. Okay, and you have to use data from the graph above and your own knowledge. So how would I answer this question? I'm going to start off by looking at general trends, right? Let's say general trends. So if I had to smooth the lines out, right? If I had to pretend it was one smooth line instead of lots of jagged lines, right? What is the general trend, general pattern across there? Well, overall, it goes up, doesn't it? Whether we're talking about the change in air temperature or the change in carbon dioxide. Air temperature is the bottom line that's really, really, really spiky, and carbon dioxide's the up and down spiky one above in the darker line. So the trend for both is that they are going up. 1955 was generally lower, and 2015 is generally higher. The carbon dioxide concentration is very, very clear that it's definitely gone up, and the air temperature has gone up a bit, right? If you look at the general trend, it has. Why do we think that could be? Could we explain? That would be the next thing that I would have to do for arguing for, is can I explain the link between them? Do I think there should be a link between them? And yes, I do. Okay, we know that through global warming, you'll have done it in geography, I imagine. You've done it in biology as well. You've done it, or you might have done it in chemistry. We definitely do it in year 10 in chemistry. Through global warming, we know that the greenhouse gas layer is, or part of the greenhouse gas layer is carbon dioxide. And we know that the more carbon dioxide there is, the more greenhouse gas layer there'll be. And the greenhouse gas layer works like a greenhouse. The sun's heat can get through, infrared radiation can get through there and hit the earth. But as it comes back, if it's bouncing back at a different angle or whatever, it might not get back out. It might get stuck inside our atmosphere and warm our planet up. So do I think that that's right, that would make sense, that carbon dioxide's gone up and so has the air temperature? Yeah, I can explain that. I can tell you why that should happen. There are some problems with that. There are some reasons why actually we might go, you know what though, it's not exactly right. It's not perfect, right? There is an up and down across the whole thing, isn't there? Both lines go up and then down, and then up and then down, and then up and then down, and then up and then down, right? They're erratic. They don't go up, 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 up. So some years actually go down. The other thing that we have to consider is that the link between the two, the correlation, the fact that one goes up and the other one goes up, doesn't actually mean that one's causing the other one. It might be, it could be, but I don't know that. Even if I'm 98% sure of that, I haven't proved it. All I know is that as carbon dioxide goes up, the air temperature has gone up. It could be that there's something else in that time that's also gone up, like human population, that's also causing an increase in air temperature. So it might not just be carbon dioxide, or it might not be carbon dioxide at all. Correlation does not equal causation. It doesn't mean that that is the cause. Carbon dioxide might not be the cause of the air temperature going up. There might be an unknown factor. There could be loads of factors that we haven't plotted on that graph that actually would change the air temperature. So we have to look at what unknown factors there are, and then probably test them as well. See whether there's a link between them too. Okay? So what I'm going to suggest that you do, using the info that I've just given you, all the stuff we've just talked about, have a go at writing an answer for that question, a 4-mark answer, 2 marks for, 2 marks against. Pause this video now so that it doesn't move on, okay? And then when you're ready, unpause it and you can have a look at the answers on the next slide. So here's our answers. Same thing as I'd spoken to you about before. Generally, overall, increased CO2 gives an overall increased temperature. Both of them go up, e.g. by 0.4 degrees C. We know why that is. CO2 traps long wave radiation or infrared radiation. It traps that heat inside our atmosphere. However, there are some issues with that theory. In some years, the temperature goes down when CO2 goes up. If they're linked, that shouldn't happen. Many erratic rises and falls in temperature, large and small rises and falls. So although generally it is going up, sometimes, technically, for a year or 2 years, it's going down. Correlation does not mean a causal link. So the fact that CO2 goes up and temperature goes up does not actually mean that CO2 is doing it. And there might be other factors involved. There might be other unknown factors. Here's one that I would like you to try. So this one I would like you to have a go at on your own. And there are 2 slides for this. There are 2 slides that we're going to go through, okay, with questions on them. And then I'll ask you to pause the video and you can have a look at the answers. So some of those words from that box there are going to go into those empty spaces. Okay, I'll give you, you can either pause the video or I'll wait another 10-15 seconds now and then we'll move on. Okay, by that time you should have decided which words you were intending on using and written them down so you can check at the end that actually you were right. Okay. So here's the next part to our question, follows on from the previous bit. Deforestation can have negative effects in our ecosystems. What are the negative effects of deforestation? Tick 2 boxes. Pick 2. Decide which 2 you would have ticked. And then the bottom one, E. Scientists try to reduce the negative effects of human activity on our ecosystems. One way would be to protect rare habitats. Give one other way. One other thing that I've mentioned so far in this video that you think could help reduce the negative effects of humans living in an area. What I would do at this point is I would pause the video because you might want to write a sentence for E. But if you're ready, the answers will show up just in a sec. Okay, so answers for this one. Carbon dioxide and photosynthesis were the first two. The next two things you had to choose, the two boxes you had to tick, were that animals and birds migrate because there is less food and more habitats are destroyed. And finally, what could we do to reduce humans' negative impacts on the environment? We could set up a breeding program where we encourage an animal to breed to make more babies and therefore try to save the species. We could have a regeneration program where we try to improve the area, try and bring the habitat back to what it used to look like. We can reintroduce field margins and hedgerows. One of the big problems that lots of smaller mammals and stuff have, field mice and stuff like that, is that every time a farmer puts a hedge in, effectively the hedge is in the way. The hedge could be field that's used for growing stuff. Also, he has to drive round the hedge to get to the next bit of field. And actually, if the hedge wasn't there at all, then he could just drive straight through and it would make everything a lot easier. The problem with that is that the hedge contains, it gives a habitat for insects to live in. So if there's something that tends to eat your crop that you're growing, that eats wheat or eats corn or whatever it is that you're growing, if you've got a hedgerow, the predators for those little insects will live in that hedge. And if you get rid of the hedge, then the predators have nowhere to live, so they leave. And that little insect that likes eating all your corn will have the whole field to itself. We can also try to raise awareness with politicians and the public, so we'll get people on side. People have to feel angry about it and feel like something needs to be done. And recycling as much as possible could also stop human impact on an environment. Recycle as much as we can. So we're going to move on to the next section of our video, which is pesticides, and we're looking at why do farmers use pesticides. Pesticides either break down and become harmless over time, or they're persistent and not broken down. DDT is a useful pesticide, but that was persistent. What does that actually mean? DDT bioaccumulates in food chains. So although the smallest things at the bottom of the food chain will get a small amount of DDT, it's not enough to kill them. However, if there's a small amount of DDT in a worm after it's eaten a load of leaves, each bird might eat 2 worms, and then each hawk at the top end might eat 2 birds, 2 smaller birds. And actually every time that we add another level to this, the animal at that level eats more. It's a bigger animal, it eats more of the thing below, in which case it's getting loads and loads and loads and loads of this pesticide building up. So the pesticide DDT didn't kill all the little insects, it didn't kill the invertebrates like the worms, it didn't kill the smallest birds, but it did kill the really endangered rare ones, which is awful. Okay. As you can see, the worms have got 3 bits in each, the birds got 6 bits in each, and then the one at the top, your hawk or your sparrowhawk or whatever that is, kestrel, something, it's eaten all 12. It's eaten all 12 of those. Wasn't enough to kill anything else, but it is to kill the top predator. It actually thinned the shells, the birds' eggshells, so that they broke before they were ready to hatch, and therefore the babies didn't survive. Although we could be talking about a really harmful pesticide like cyanide or something that actually would kill the animal. So bioaccumulation can happen in humans as well. Heavy metals like mercury is something that can bioaccumulate in humans. One of the things we use it for is paint. That stops things growing on the hulls of ships. Now, it already sounds like an awful idea, doesn't it? If it stops stuff growing on your boat, it stops stuff growing on it because it's killing it, right? Unfortunately, it then bioaccumulates in aquatic food chains, and it can end up building up in everything, including us, if we eat lots of fish. So there's your bioaccumulation of mercury, bit in the plankton, bit more in the animal plankton, bit more in the small fish, and then the tuna fish ends up with loads. Last thing for us for today. These things here are lichens, okay, and we have got an exam question at the end of this one. I am aware the video is getting longer. Lichens. So, lichens are plants that grow on exposed places such as rocks or tree bark. You can see them all over your walls in your garden, or on a tree in your garden, or whatever. You can find them all over the place. Because they're so sensitive to pollutants, there's some of them that will not grow in a city centre. You won't find them in a city centre because they get too much pollution and it kills them. So if you find those ones on a tree nearby, you know it's a clean place to live. Others of them will grow even where there's nothing else growing. So they'll grow in the polluted areas, and they can give you an indicator that actually this area is polluted. So these ones here, you've got bushy lichens, these ones on the left hand side, those are the kinds of things that will not live in the city centre. You don't get them because they get too much pollution and they die. Leafy lichens you probably find in local parks where it's nice and far away from roads and stuff, but you're not going to find it in the city centre. You're not going to get them growing in the city centre. And crusty lichens you probably can find on your walls around your house or in your garden. They survive in more polluted air. Okay? So this is the kind of thing that you might get asked about. This is a map showing the position of the farm and the river that flows through it on here. You can see site A is right up near the top, near the forest. Then it comes down, the river comes down the hill into a lake. Then it goes through site B and then down to site C. Site C is a city, site B is a farm, and the forest's at the top. You can see the key at the bottom. Every year the farmer puts fertiliser containing mineral ions on some of his fields. When there's a lot of rain, some of the fertiliser is washed into the river. Okay. So immediately we're looking at this and saying, well, there's not going to be any of the fertiliser in the lake because that's upstream, and you're not going to get any at site A because that's upriver. But by the time you get down to site C in the city, there'll be lots of stuff in there. So this is the scientists' results from looking at a study on that area. And they've looked at the number of species of different types of insect. They've said mayfly, stonefly and caddisfly. They've coloured them all in differently. You can see them using the key at site A, site B and site C. How many more species of mayfly were there at site B than site A? So mayfly is the kind of diagonally striped one. Alright, see if you can work out how many more you think there were at site B than site A. So the second part of this question says, suggest what caused an increase in the number of species of mayfly. So this time we're thinking, why at the farmer's site at site B, at the farm, why do we suddenly see this increase in the species of mayfly? What is it at the farm that's attracting them? Finally, the scientists stated that the number of species of stonefly was the best indicator of the amount of oxygen dissolved in the water. You might have to go back to this graph here, just rewind your video a little bit and pause me, tell me to shut up for a second, okay? Because you might have to go back and look at that graph again and say, right, okay, well, what information suggests that? What information from the graph suggests that the stonefly was the best indicator of the amount of oxygen dissolved in the water? Where were they and where weren't they? Where can you find them and can't you find them? So I would be pausing the video now while you write your answers down. So here's our answers. We're going to have a quick look. D1, there were 2 extra species. There were 2 more species at site B than there were at site A. What's probably making them go to the farm? More food. the farmers growing stuff that they eat. Okay. Part 3. The number of stonefly species decreases from A to B to C. It's the only one that goes down, down, down. The mayfly does go down by C, but it was actually bigger at B at the farm because there's more food. Whereas the stonefly just goes down and down and down because they can't live in rivers that with less oxygen, rivers that are polluted. Okay? So with that, I think that's just about the end of our video. Do go back and have a look through it. If there's anything else that you need to make notes on, do go and have a watch of the Hawaii video, because I think the Hawaii video is really interesting. It's very good. It will take you 45 minutes, but it's something you could sit and watch on an evening, and it does highlight some of these big issues that we've been talking about. Okay. Again, have a pleasant day and enjoy. Bye bye.